headlines, sorting through the media bias, exposing the propaganda, and challenging you to use your brain. It's time to tap into the truth.
Mr. Speaker, the President decided to raise energy prices on all Americans, which adversely affects the poor the most, and he didn't ask Congress. The President decided to unilaterally reduce our strategic nuclear deterrent when more countries than ever have nuclear weapons. No treaty, that would require consent of the Senate. The President has decided which health insurance plans the people are allowed to have. The President didn't ask Congress, or the people for that matter. The list goes on. In America, we are either moving more towards liberty or more towards tyranny. Well, I think we should ask ourselves what tyranny would look like in the United States of America. An executive branch that picks and chooses which laws it wants to enforce. A judicial branch that would allow it to do so on grounds that the executive branch did not defend the laws in court. The legislative branch would have very limited power because they turned it all over to the President, and the people would feel like they had no representation. The President told us he was going to fundamentally transform America, and I think that is exactly what he is doing. I yield back.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed time to tap into the truth. Coming to you live from historic Roane County, Tennessee, this is your host, Tim Tapp. Coming to you tonight, basically doing a follow-up show from this past Sunday's show, where we were over on Blog Talk. Had a very interesting show, fought through a great deal of technical difficulties. Wasn't able to get the guest on into the second hour. Thankfully, we were finally able to get her on. And she certainly livened things up a bit. Had a very unique caller in the first hour. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, I highly recommend you check out Tap Into the Truth over at Blog Talk and give it a listen. Be sure to follow the show while you're over there. Go ahead and follow the show here while you're at it. Keeping in mind that now, if you happen to be one of these people that prefer to check out your podcast on iTunes, well, guess what? You now can get Tap Into the Truth over at iTunes, both versions here at Spreaker and over at Blog Talk as well. So there you go. One more option and another opportunity to check out Tap Into the Truth. Don't forget to check out our website while you're at it, tapintothetruth.com. That is, of course, spelled T-A-P-P, into the truth. Plenty of opportunities over there to check out past shows there as well, along with various topics, videos, blog posts, and a also page dedicated to other links of friends to the show and sponsors. On the subject of sponsors, if anyone's interested in becoming one, please feel free to contact us through the website or via email. And if you have any interest or know anyone who would be interested in possibly being a guest on Tap Into the Truth, also feel free to contact us through the website. Certainly always looking to have someone interesting with interesting topics to discuss. After all, that's what we're here for. We're here to talk. Quick hits on a couple of highlights and headlines on the news. Anthony Weiner is, of course, making major waves again, as it seems like he just can't seem to keep himself out of trouble. Of course, most of you probably know by now that he is running for mayor of New York City. Somebody with the type of checkered past that Mr. Weiner has at this time probably only has a chance of getting elected in a couple of places in this country. New York City is one that he has an outside chance. I would imagine he probably ought to think about relocating to San Francisco. He probably would be well embraced there. Seems that he lied to a lot of people about having recovered from his sexting addiction. And that certainly has come to light recently, that it in fact is nowhere near being cured, as he claimed. It seems he's been doing quite a bit of it, even recently, based on stories that are out now. And there are several Democrats, as well as the local newspaper, that are calling for him to step out of the race. I do not expect that he will do that. After all, those of us who have been paying any attention at all to Anthony Weiner's political career are very much aware of the fact that the man cannot stay out of the spotlight. He cannot stand not to be someone important. While we're at it, also, if you're following the Edward Snowden storyline, the epic drama that continues there, big news, sort of. He got to leave the airport for a little while today, or at least that's what's being reported. Not real sure if there's anything significant to that other than the fact that at least a temporary asylum may be granted to him very shortly there. Also, big news that a lot of people are focusing on, especially in the conservative circles. Detroit is trying to declare bankruptcy. You know, I almost think it's a good thing that a lot of the talk shows and news media decided to hit on Detroit bankruptcy instead of continuing to focus on the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman trial verdict. It's pretty well played out. I think the media got it when they saw not as many folks as they had expected or anticipated actually showing up for the 100-city protest. As a matter of fact, Sunday's show took place the day after the 100-city protest organized by the Reverend Al Sharpton. I'm not real sure who holds him in reverend esteem, quite honestly. But there was also a counter-protest that took place in social media. That counter-protest was based on the idea of continuing to bring attention back to Benghazi. It was justice for Christopher. I myself participated, as well as several folks I knew. The person who actually started and organized it was my guest last Sunday. Her name is Diane. If you'll check in the links or the show description when we're done broadcasting tonight, you'll have information on her and links to check out her writing. She runs her own blog as well as being a contributing writer for Lady Patriots and a couple of other big-time sites. But I'm very much friends with the folks over at Lady Patriots. Dr. Sharon Schutz has been on my Blog Talk show a few times now and always has something interesting to say. But Diane, very opinionated, a little bit more fiery, and she was bringing the heat. She's wrote several op-eds recently in regards to the race baiting and the push from the administration as to why they might be interested in trying to maintain and stir the pot, if you will, in regards to the outcome of the Zimmerman trial. Now, the title of today's broadcast is still kind of tied in to the previous broadcast from Sunday. And what I'm going to start doing now, in the past, the same title went over the basic same subjects when we went over this. Well, I'm back to 2 hours over at Blog Talk, so it's going to be harder for me to do the Sunday shows the way I've been doing them the last few weeks here. So I'm going to start getting on here a little more frequently through the week and try to give you more coverage, and we'll do some follow-up stuff and get some stuff out there that I wasn't able to do there, so that you will have a reason. If you listened into the other, you'll still have a reason to come over here and listen into this as well. If we have something really good, like an interview or a guest that's on that's really phenomenal, probably we'll replay some of that over here. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to start covering stuff. I mentioned earlier I had technical difficulties. Part of that technical difficulties kept me from being able to play my promotional stuff, and it also kept me from being able to play the sound bites I collected. Sadly, I only had 3 sound bites anyway. Never quite got to them. Like I said, the conversation got good in the... the conversation got pretty good in the second hour, though. So if you decide to check it out over there, if you want to skip the first hour, I wouldn't blame you. But the second hour is well worth a listen. At any rate, the point of the episode there in tonight's broadcast is what is it really that the left was after, in this case in particular the media, and why left-leaning politicians helped stir the pot. There were some points I didn't get to make because conversation took us away from it, and I'm always going to let the conversation over there lead where it's going to lead. As long as I don't have more callers waiting on the line, I'm going to let a caller who calls in talk until they run out of things to say. That can be disastrous, but we're looking for participation, and I had a very interesting caller in the first hour who had some opinions, so you might want to listen into that too. It's actually a pretty entertaining show, I think, overall. But the point being, let me get back on point here. What was it exactly that the left was after? From the very beginning, from the very onset, there was a specific purpose when the mainstream national media decided to latch on to the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case. It wasn't about social justice, although you hear that a lot. It wasn't about racism in America. They knew they had a string point that would manage to get people's attention by stirring that particular pot, but it wasn't about that either. It was about one simple thing. And I started saying this, and for those of you who are longtime listeners, you've heard me say this before, and you probably caught a blog posting or two on the same topic. It never really clued into me originally exactly why the media was talking about the stand your ground laws in the early days when this first got media attention before Zimmerman's arrest. I didn't see where it really came into play. It didn't seem to be part of this case. Now, there was some brief mention that one of our callers previously had mentioned that Zimmerman's first attorney, and I have to admit I've been pretty busy. I haven't had a chance to go back and double check this, so I don't know how accurate this is. This was just something the caller had said, that his first attorney had mentioned possibly using stand your ground as part of the defense, or maybe that was going to be his defense. But whatever purpose, once it actually came to trial time, it was a simple, straight up and down self-defense. That was the whole defensive strategy. And given what little bit of evidence that there actually was, I'd say the defense team did exactly what they needed to do. But here's where it gets tricky. Stand your ground did not go away. In fact, as soon as the verdict was read out, what happened? You had some angry voices calling out. But there wasn't riots in the streets. There wasn't a lot of negativity. There wasn't a lot of people going out and doing stupid crap, except out in California. And let's face facts, most of those folks were just looking for an excuse to try and cause a little mayhem. They're no more upset about Trayvon Martin's death than they're upset that Edward Snowden's hanging out in an airport in Russia. In fact, they probably don't even know about that. Oh, that crazy guy in the airport, I heard something. They have no idea what's going on with that. You talk about uninformed voters, low information voters. These guys are that. They were just looking for an excuse to start some mayhem. And almost immediately, you had a group, Al Sharpton being the ringleader here, that was upset, outwardly upset, that there were no riots. They wanted full-blown riots. Why? Because they're looking for a chance to swoop in and be important again. You know, Al is missing being out there being a community organizer because of his job as a host on MSNBC. Well, he doesn't have to miss it anymore because he got out and he did it. And he got his pal, Jesse Jackson, to come down, and they got a couple of photo ops together. Yay. Good for them. They got another 2 minutes tacked on to their almost 15 minutes of fame. These are two guys who have not been relevant in the black community for some time, except among a very small percentage of people. And I feel pretty bad for those people, because what are you hanging on to that these people are important to you? But guess what? Sadly enough, this was an opportunity for them. So here's what they wanted. They wanted a chance to make money. They're profiteering off of it. Both of them have made careers, as sad as their careers have been to this point, out of being race baiters and out of being troublemakers. They've managed to make a living doing that. That's why they're not as important or as much of black leadership in America as they were once thought of being. Because here's the real fact that came out loud and clear more than anything. The general reaction to this is, yeah, there were a lot of hurt feelings and there was a lot of anger, but there wasn't riots, even in places that are prone to rioting. Race relations have improved in the United States. Now, that's not to say that there's not still prejudice and that there's still not anger and even hatred from various groups on all sides of the equation. But the fact that we didn't see a lot of widespread violence. Now, there was violence. There was vandalism. There was people getting beaten up. There was attacks. These things still happened, but nowhere near on the level that we saw during just the Rodney King incident. So this shows improvement, and it also shows that, hopefully, I think, more people have started to wake up to the fact that they're being used a lot of times. And that's what they were hoping to do here again. The media had one thing in mind. They wanted to attack Stand Your Ground. And this is still part of this ultimate attempt to step in and eventually destroy the Second Amendment. They want to take gun ownership rights away from American citizens. And they definitely don't want you thinking for a second that you have a right to stand your ground in the event that you're actually just defending yourself, because they don't want you thinking that you have a right to defend yourself. You're supposed to call the police. You're supposed to depend on the government for everything. Well, while you're in the middle of depending on the government for everything, as I've mentioned before, even if you have the most conscientious police officer who's doing the best job they possibly can, and I think most policemen are doing the best job they can, there are some bad apples, and that has led to some pretty negative stereotypes and a lot of distrust and anger towards the police. But I think most police officers are doing the job. They're doing the job well, and I think you run into a few exceptions here and there, and it gives the rest of them a bad name. But even if you have the greatest assembled police force on the planet, and you live just a few minutes away from the police station, if your home is being invaded, the chances of the police being able to get to you before serious bodily harm occurs to you is next to nil. The police are a reactionary force. They don't even get called until after something's happened. So if you're really needing to defend yourself, calling the police is not an option. One of the things that most people really don't understand about Stand Your Ground laws is that the way they're written, of course, from state to state, they're different. There are approximately 33 states that have some type of law that basically tends towards being a Stand Your Ground. There are 25 states that have exactly by definition, by letter of the law, Stand Your Ground laws. Each and every one of them is a little bit different. Regardless of the case, all most of them really do is just say that you do not have a duty to retreat. Now, in the states that don't have it, you are expected to run away before you're allowed to use any kind of force to protect yourself. If there's an opportunity to retreat, you have the duty to do so. And people can make an argument, and it might even be a legitimate argument, that there are occasions where the best thing you can do is just remove yourself from the situation if at all possible. Keep it from escalating so nothing bad happens. Well, if you've got that opportunity, common sense says, yeah, do it. But you don't always have that opportunity. And the effort that you expend in trying to retreat may be the difference between whether or not you actually can survive the encounter or not. So, stand your ground laws, they don't say you have the right to be aggressive. They don't say that you have the right to openly attack somebody because you think they're going to attack you. They just say that you don't have the duty or responsibility to retreat if you feel that you are being threatened. Still doesn't say, oh, you get to get all buck wild and attack and start shooting and whatever. So it's important to keep that in mind. But as we look at it, why does the left get upset when you have the right to stand your ground? Well, I've already said it. The bottom line is they do not want you thinking you have the right to defend yourself, because that means you're going to cling to that Second Amendment right of gun ownership even stronger. They're attacking gun ownership. Now, several states that have stand your ground laws or equivalents thereof have had them on the books for 8 years or longer. But what was going on about the time the Zimmerman case occurred was there was a new sudden rush of additional states that started passing stand your ground laws. They effectively managed to slow it down just by putting this case in the spotlight. Didn't matter if Zimmerman's defense was actually going to use stand your ground as part of their defensive strategy. They had hoped everyone would buy into the fact that Zimmerman was a Caucasian, which, for all intents and purposes, he's pretty white from what I see. Now, he is half Hispanic by nationality. His mother is Peruvian. But it's not relevant. Now, the Obama administration, the occupier and his Justice Department, had a vested interest in trying to stir things up. They wanted this because they were in desperate need of a distraction, and that part of it really seems to have worked. Because almost immediately, the IRS scandal and the NSA scandal that were still getting major media coverage, it just went away. Now we have to talk about this trial as it's winding down in the last couple of days. And then when the verdict was read, oh, the injustice, oh, the race baiting that began from the White House. They intentionally tried to stir things up. And again, thank goodness, for the most part, not much happened. But again, within a day of the verdict being read, you had Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Eric Holder, Barack Obama, a.k.a. the occupier. They were all talking about race relations and how blah, blah, blah. Now, the occupier tried to play it straight for a couple of days, and then he just couldn't help himself. He had to go out there and pretend like he's more black than he's white and act like he's still down with the cause. But what's worse about that is that the cause should be equality. And anytime you want to stand up and say, well, it's okay for this division to exist because of whatever, you want to make those excuses, then you're just going to cause trouble. But even while they were doing that at this point in time, what else do you have going on? Well, then you start hearing people in the media again talking about what? Stand your ground laws. That's all the mainstream media ever wanted from this case. And now you've got politicians that are falling in line with it. And worst of all, some of them are even, although at this point in time we know they're pretty much rhinos, supposed to be conservative Republicans. One of the ringleaders, of course, this past Sunday was John McCain. Here's a snippet of his Sunday morning appearance.
One that I know of has said that this case was flawed, that it was corrupt, that there was anything wrong with the system of justice. I can also see that stand your ground law may be something that needs to be reviewed by the
Now, right there, stand your ground law may be something that needs to be reviewed. And the reporter immediately asked, in Arizona, because Arizona has stand your ground laws. Here's the rest of the clip. I had to get in right there because once he said the question that he had been asked had nothing to do with stand your ground. He made a point of bringing it up. You want to tell me that they're not attacking it? Then you'd be wrong. Here's the rest of the clip.
Florida legislature or any other legislature that has passed such legislation. Obviously, a lot of things need to come up for review, but to somehow condemn the verdict of the jury, you would have to show me where the jury was corrupted in any way. Events like this that highlight and emphasize the fact that we still have a long way to go. And I think the president very appropriately highlighted a lot of that yesterday, as only a president of the United States can.
Now, the remainder of that, he's talking about Barack's speech where he moves away from the, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon, to Trayvon could have been me. Now, there were some points, to be completely fair, some of the points of the speech he gave were hitting the right tone. They were appropriate things to say, but there were still those little places where he just couldn't help himself, and he was moving into the realm of race baiting. So to praise the president based on that particular speech is insane. But the media did. The media was just in love for Monday and Tuesday, both of this week. They were going nuts. Oh, he's great. He's back. He's back to being the Messiah. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't make me sick. Anyway, it didn't stop there because even Barack himself specifically talked about stand your ground. Here's that clip.
Along the same lines, I think it'd be useful for us to examine some state and local laws to see if it...
Okay, I'm going to pause right there. To examine some state and local laws. That's what he's talking about right there. Stand your ground. Listen carefully to the rest.
If they are designed in such a way that they may encourage the kinds of altercations and confrontations and tragedies that we saw in the Florida case.
Now, if they're designed to encourage... See, here's the big lie that the left never will admit to you. The more likely it is that you are armed, and the more likely the criminal aspect knows that you are armed, the less likely you are to have a confrontation. Most criminals are criminals because they don't want to put in the effort to earn an honest living. Now, that's not the case for all of them. There's some hard-working hustlers out there. I ain't playing. I have spent some time in North Knoxville. I've spent some time in East Knoxville. That's not as big and as hardcore as some places out towards Memphis. I'll grant you that. But let me tell you, that is straight up street in East Knoxville. If you spend any time there for real and you get to know any of those people, then you know what's going on. So yeah, there's some straight up hardcore, hard-working hustlers out there doing their thing, working hard. Could be successful at anything if they would have gotten themselves an education or whatever, what have you. Beside the point. Most criminals, though, they're looking for the easy targets. That's the lie that they're ignoring right here and still trying to convince you because he's trying to sound smart and reasonable. But don't buy the lies, don't buy the hype. Look at the real statistics on the issue. Let's finish the clip.
Rather than diffuse potential altercations. I know that there's been commentary about the fact that the stand your ground laws in Florida were not used as a defense in the case. On the other hand, if we're sending a message as a society in our communities that someone who is armed potentially has the right to use those firearms, even if there's a way for them to exit from a situation, is that really going to be contributing to the kind of peace and security and order that we'd like to see? And for those who resist that idea that we should think about something like these stand your ground laws, I just ask people to consider, if Trayvon Martin was of age and armed, could he have stood his ground on that sidewalk?
And here is the answer. No, there is not a single stand your ground law anywhere that doesn't specifically state that you must not be in the action of performing something illegal. You can only be legally minding your own. Trayvon Martin, according to the evidence that was presented, was apparently assaulting George Zimmerman. He started the fight. Even the phone call with the girlfriend tells you that. You cannot start a physical altercation and then be considering to stand your ground. But again, desperately trying to sound reasonable. That's another part of the lie. There's a little more to this clip, but I'm through. I can only stand to hear so much of the occupier. And at some point, we may come back to it. But again, 3 big lies, and the whole point is you're supposed to be smart enough to know that we intellectuals know that guns are not appropriate, and you shouldn't try to defend yourself. But here's something else I have to tell you. One of the most abrasive voices of commentary in the past, especially on race relations, has to be Charles Barkley. For those of you who are familiar with Sir Charles, the round mound of rebound, as he was known way back in the day when he was actually still playing basketball, played at the University of Auburn, had a long career with the 76ers, and then played for the Phoenix Suns for a bit. He was a really good basketball player. He really was. And I enjoyed watching him play when I was young until I found out how racist he was, and it just became harder and harder to tolerate him at that point. But he made probably one of the most straightforward points that you heard any athlete or Hollywood entertainer type say when it came to this case. And I'm going to play that clip in its entirety because it comes to the point that not only does he not condemn the jury verdict, but he also calls out the media much the same way I've been trying to do for the past 2 weeks, because the media is more responsible for the anger that's come from this case than anyone else, period. Make no mistake about it, the politicians wanted you riled up for 2 reasons. They wanted the diversion from the scandals, and they wanted you to have something else to talk about. That was it. And that's actually the same thing. There was a second thing they wanted, and the big point is the politicians still want to take the guns. They think they can still lay the groundwork to come after the Second Amendment rights, but they also wanted you distracted. You, the American people, distracted while important things were going on. I don't know, like tensions rising between Russia and Israel because Israel struck some Syrian positions where Russian-made weapons were being utilized. Yeah. Probably didn't even hear about that, did you? That pretty much is come and gone. That story happened. We were too busy talking about Trayvon. But when Charles Barkley is the voice of reason on anything that's race-related, then that's a pretty good sign that America as a whole is waking up. Here's his clip. It's very good. This was off of a show on ESPN. Listen up.
Any thoughts on the George Zimmerman verdict?
Well, I agreed with the verdict.
Yeah.
I feel sorry that young kid got killed, but they didn't have enough evidence to charge him. Something clearly went wrong that night. Clearly something went wrong, and I feel bad for anybody who loses a kid. But if you looked at the case and you don't make it, there was some racial profiling, no question about it. But something happened to change the dynamic of that night, and I know, and that's probably not a popular opinion among most people, but just looking at the evidence, I agree with the verdict. I just feel bad because I don't like when race gets out in the media, because I don't think the media has a pure heart, as I call it. There are very few people who have a pure heart when it comes to race. Racism is wrong in any shape, form. There are a lot of black people who are racist too. I think sometimes when people talk about race, they act like only white people are racist. There are a lot of black people who are racist. And I don't like when it gets out there in the media, because I don't think the media has clean hands.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
I'm glad you made that point.
I don't think the media has clean hands. Yeah. And like I said, I feel sorry that young kid got killed, but just judging by the evidence, I don't think that guy should have went to jail for the rest of his life. But something happened bad that night, obviously.
Yeah, I like what one of the jurors said. They said they both should have walked away.
Yes.
And if there's a shadow of a doubt, there's a shadow of a doubt.
And let me say, Mr. Zimmerman was wrong he was racial profiling.
Absolutely.
But I think Trayvon Martin, God rest his soul, I think he did flip the switch and start beating the hell out of Mr. Zimmerman. But it was just a bad situation. Like I said, the main thing I feel bad for, it gives every white person and black person who's racist a platform to vent their ignorance.
Right.
You know, that's the thing that bothered me the most, because I watched this trial closely, and I watch all these people on television talking about it. A lot of these people have a hidden agenda. You know, they want to have their racist views, whether they're white or black.
The bias comes out.
The bias, it definitely comes out.
Yeah.
It was a bad situation. We all lost. And I feel bad for his parents, because you don't ever want to see anybody lose a kid.
Okay, so Mr. Charles Barkley hits a lot of really good points there, although I do have to disagree on the part about Zimmerman racially profiling, because I don't think, based on the way Trayvon Martin was dressed and going through that neighborhood, that he knew immediately what color he was. I think it was only after he took a serious look, because he saw somebody he didn't recognize who probably looked like they did not belong in this neighborhood. He saw them coming through, and then he started watching. But, you know, doesn't really matter at this point. And regardless of where you're at on this issue, no matter which side of the argument you're on, what my point here is we can't get this distraction keep us from seeing what they're really up to, and we can't let this thing anger us. Okay, going to take a quick break. After the break, going to do the summation on the show, and then we're going to take it home. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tap into the truth. Check us out at tapintothetruth.com for our latest blog post and for links to all of our past broadcasts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. That's Tap Into the Truth right here on Spreaker Radio.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Thanks for staying with us and coming through to the other side of that break with us. Definitely making the case to check us out on our webpage. Check us out on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. The whole nine. Will be extending social media. And like I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, you now can hear the podcast at iTunes. So if that's your cup of tea over there using your Apple devices, well, there you go. Meanwhile, time for the summation. We got about 4.5 minutes left in tonight's show. So here's the deal. Exhibit A. Early, when this case first started getting national attention, they were talking about stand your ground right off the bat. The arrest is finally made. Charges are filed. What happens? The police chief loses his job because he makes a stand, stating basically that there's not enough evidence for an arrest here. He's not going to do it. More pressure comes from the Justice Department. The state of Florida then decides they're going to skip the grand jury process. I'm still waiting to hear an official legal opinion on this, as I've asked around some lawyers that I know. Unfortunately, most of them are Tennessee lawyers, and they're not as familiar with the Florida state law as they would need to be to answer the question. But in most states, it's not even legal to move a capital case forward without a grand jury indictment. Why was it skipped? I contend that both the federal government and the state government knew, without a shadow of a doubt, if they had taken this to a grand jury, it would have never gotten the indictment. Again, because there just wasn't enough evidence. I don't know what happened that night. And the truth of the matter is, no matter what your opinions may be, what your theories may be, what your extrapolations may be, what you may be 100% certain of in your mind, you still do not know what happened because you were not there. Only two people knew with 100% certainty what happened, and only one of them had a chance to tell their side of the story because the other one's dead. Now, that's a tragedy. Trayvon Martin should not be dead. But from all indications, Trayvon Martin made every appearance of being a street thug. And something tells me he was trying to represent. And unfortunately for him, that got him shot. Now, there were 100 opportunities for both these men to defuse the situation. If Trayvon had just kept going his way instead of circling back, deal's probably done. But regardless, point is, what's the government doing? The government knew they couldn't get an indictment. They didn't have the evidence. They also knew they couldn't get a conviction. During the course of the trial, the prosecution at times almost seemed to be working for Zimmerman. Why? I would contend that they actually wanted Mr. Zimmerman to walk. I don't think they had any intention of ever having that man convicted. They knew they didn't have the case anyway. I think they wanted the not guilty verdict so that, again, they could stir up the racial tensions and try to cause trouble. They were hoping that we, the American people, would become so enthralled with the story that we would lose focus on important things and not pay adequate attention to the important things and let them get away with their distraction. Because what happened? The media, no more did you hear mentioned of Benghazi. No more did you hear mention of the NSA spying scandal. No more did you hear about the IRS scandal. Unless you were listening to alternative media. Unless you were listening to Tap Into the Truth, unless you were listening to several other folks that are hardcore, grassroots, true conservatives that are on point and recognized this for what it was. And I hope most of you did too. Then, when there weren't riots immediately, they went to work trying to get people fired up enough to cause them. Worked a little bit out west, not so much around here, especially down in Florida, where it should have been the epicenter. But most of those people already knew the truth because they had had months of reporting of what actually happened before the national media, NBC in particular, started doctoring 911 phone call tapes the Justice Department of the United States spent federal taxpayer dollars to bus people in for these anti-Zimmerman rallies. The bottom line, they were hit. We were lied to. They wanted anger. Ladies and gentlemen, that's tonight's show. Remember, don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take their word for it. Do your own research. Use your brain. And have a great night, everybody.